Hello, this is Vision Denial and Clearing Vision MSI 2022. My name is Sam, and for those of you who are new, I've watched every single playoff game from all 11 competing regions. Yes, including that one. And the group stages are done. Yes, that's right. We've got our 6 qualifying teams, and we had to say goodbye to the last 2 teams. Well, that is what happens, right? Without further ado, though, I don't think there's anything new to discuss regarding things. There's no announcements, nothing going on. Just the group stages are done, and we're going to get to look at what's new and fresh in terms of who's been qualified and if there's anything that's unexpected that came up. So how about we just get into it? Well, let's start with the first game of the day being... We got the Latin American representatives of the LLA Team Aze with the VCS Vietnamese Saigon Buffaloes. Now the Buffaloes showing a solid control and respect early game really allowed them to gain a lead that was pushed to its absolute limits. Solid vision and never allowing Ace to really contest neutrals made it very hard for them to get any avenues to return in the game. Mostly, from the last 4 games they played, Ace continue to show that they're unable to play the kind of early game this meta is expected to have. The hesitancy mixed alongside the lack of laning prowess to survive the constant pressure makes any answers very difficult for them. I really want to see Ace attempt some sort of early game play for their last 2 games that they have, as they only have Pride left to defend, as this is the game that eliminated them from MSI, which is super unfortunate. Let's take a look at the gold graph to show what I mean from this. As you can tell here, the Buffaloes had full solid control of literally first blood, all of the neutrals, first turret, even the Baron, which ended up eventually leading to the end of the game for them. And it's not by any lack of trying. Like, Ace did absolutely look for avenues that would really aid them near the mid to late game, but the lack of ability to play towards the early game only had them suffer from it at just overall, which is super unfortunate. Like, I really hope that the time between their last games on Wednesday and today would have gotten their chance, or on Wednesday, their last game's on Thursday, and today would have given them the chance to really, adjust and adapt from the situation. But it doesn't look like that was the case here. So let's take a look at the next game. We've got over here the Japanese representatives in Detonation Focus Me versus the LCKs, the favorites of the tournament, T1. And, oh boy. There's another elimination game here, right? Both teams draft scaling compositions, and yet I stand here and see that Detonation Focus Me play some excellent early game here. The unfortunate nature of the situation is that T1 is able to temper the fumbles that they had a little bit earlier and regain control from laning prowess and smart macro choices, leading to a quick reversal of the lead still within the early game. And once that lead was taken from Detonation Focus Me, it looked like they were just scrambling for any advantages they could get, trading down most of the time or just not at all. Now, Detonation Focus Me have shown a solid approach to what avenues, for the different avenues that would stop T1's fast-paced aggression, but failed to follow up on it as the tempo really needs to be slowly increased. You can't just be the first team to get an early game lead and try to control it. You need to be increasing the tempo, or T1 will just catch up and find any avenue back just to answer what you've got. If you can't match their laning prowess, that's exactly what's going to happen. So let's take a look at the gold graph to show what I mean here. And right off the bat, like, you can see Detonation Focus Me having a peak of 1,000 gold lead before the 10-minute mark, but it swiftly drops right off the bat, and they never balloon it more than that at any given point. Right, it goes back and forth with 1,000 gold on each side, and then the second that T1 grabs hold of the situation, they just run with it, like, absolutely wild. And it's super unfortunate with this particular scenario because they clearly knew what would be the approach for this, and this was their last game to, like, guarantee that they'll make it through to the Rumble stage. And with it, all that opportunity gone. No chance for it anymore. They have 2 games to play for pride and to show us something different, but for the moment in time being, their inability to balloon any particular leads and really push it really caught them in this situation. So let's take a look at the next game. We've got the Saigon Buffaloes versus Detonation Focus Me. And, oh boy, what a bloody fight. Like, absolutely nonstop skirmishes. Usually these particular nonstop skirmishes create scenarios that are filled with a lot of mistakes that are super hard to navigate. You'll notice the low turret score that involved in this particular game, lower than usually a very dominant one-sided approach that a lot of these games have had, and how both teams traded neutrals nonstop, consistently, right? It was fun to watch, but it also showed very well why both of these teams were contenders for the second slot for the Rumble stage from this group. Holding some strong sense of how to approach the early games, but super inconsistent with how they use leads to build up or how to close out the games without opting into fights that are wildly out of control. I'm still of the mindset that the Buffaloes can beat T1, and this game here showed precisely the reason why I thought so, which is that they keep looking for opportunities and openings to retake control of the game consistently, regardless of the leads or deficits that they're under. Now, I'll enjoy watching the rematch of the Buffaloes versus T1 based off of how this game went out, because the Buffaloes really stole this out of nowhere. It was super fun. So let's take a look at the goal graph, actually. And, like, already you can see the Buffaloes have control of the early neutrals to begin with, and then, like, Detonation Focus Me comes into the mid game and late game and does the whole thing, and then it just swings back. Neither team holding a huge lead. They both control the early, Saigon Buffalo controls the early game super well, but fumbles it. And Detonation Focus Me trades fairly frequently before they get the chance to have any kind of lead, really stealing the whole show. But neither team are good at closing out the game when it's needed, and it just ends up being virtually even gold by the time the game is done, and the Buffaloes having won it out off of, like, the weirdest flanking team fight that could have happened so far. All right, let's take a look at the next game here. Let's take a look at the game of T1 versus Team Aze. Oh, this went exactly how some of you would have thought this goes. It's really hard to analyze games like these, especially in a situation where Ace had some semblance of a lead early in, just like a little bit. But T1, however, find a perfect avenues on how to gain and push the leads even harder amid and Ace over here find some small trades, more often than not, trying to get these particular trades down. But they are trading down a lot of the times, or just not at all, in a similar situation that, like, every other team so far has had to deal with against T1. And this game has such a crazy, gnarly pace to it. Like, most regions don't ever play with a 16k deficit at 20 minutes. It's very hard to practice situations like these, because as far as I can tell, scrims don't ever get to a point where you're this far behind so quickly, so early, you just reset the scrim. And the fact that T1 keeps doing this, and some of the other teams also against the lower seeded teams regularly just push it as far as they can go. If you don't practice it, it's hard to really go off of it. And like, I really just have to compare the three favorites and how fast and efficient they are with their leads. And honestly, T1 dwarfs the Royals and G2 in terms of how leads are used to dominate all aspects of the game. So let's take a look at the goal graph here. Right? And like at first you're looking at this and you go, okay, so it's not that big of a huge gap, but then you notice like how huge this lead is by the time the game ends. We're not even at 23 minutes. They're at the 19-minute mark. They're 10K up. Like, what are you supposed to do in a situation like this, right? It's just not feasible to practice situations like this. And like Ace, for their part, do find almost a 1K lead by the time like the 4 or 5 minute mark hits. But T1 is just so good at laning phase alone, and their players are just that much better, just that cut above. It's hard to like. It's really hard to overstate how scary this team is. All right, so let's take a look at the next game. Then we get Detonation Focus Me versus Team Aze. Oh, we finally get to see the mid to late game macro play that Ace is known for in the LLA. Detonation Focus Me's inconsistent early game approach, mixed with the fact that both teams drafted scaling, means that this was going to be played later into the game. And Ace was ready for it. It's super hard to notice, but Ace kept trading during the mid game in ways that allowed for more space and more vision to be created. This then leads to the first Baron that they get, and then taking advantage of Detonation Focus Me's poor vision approach. Then Detonation is starting to get scared, unable to balloon the leads as they had. They start taking riskier fights that Ace navigates better, and from that point, they find more points on the map for their leads to grow and grow, and for Detonation Focus Me to get riskier and riskier with the fights and start scrambling. It's super nice to see that the LLA reps got to show what got them to MSI, because honestly, their mid-game approach to everything and their late-game shot calling is pretty solid for all that matters on the situation. They just didn't get the chance to showcase any of it. So let's look at the gold graph, and see what's happening. Because by all accounts here, Detonation Focus Me near the end of the early game, going into the mid game, have a significant lead that shouldn't have been able to be countered by Ace in all manners. But notice the 3 Barons Ace is allowed to get a hold of, or the fact that they were able to get a hold of Soul Point in general, right? The game here it's just a lot of Detonation Focus Me having, this is an issue they had also during playoffs, of the inconsistent nature of being able to grab an early lead and then unable to close it in a manner that makes sense. There's a disconnect between knowing that your laners are strong enough and your early game macro decisions are strong enough to be able to gain the leads that usually you'd be able to end quickly on. But if you don't do so, the team just kind of assumes that the opponent will fall and roll over. And these fights that they kept taking were incredibly rushed and not well thought out. And Ace reads them like a book in this situation, and with it get their first win, tying for the 3rd place at this particular moment. And it, sure, not the Rumble stage, doesn't seem like it matters, but it does for pride and that they got to showcase what they were able to do. So awesome. So let's take a look at the last game of the day. And with it, we got the Saigon Buffaloes versus T1, which would be the two who move on into the Rumble stage. And this game is so silly. And yet I can't help but think that the other 4 qualified team from the other 2 groups should be terrified. Should be absolutely terrified of T1. They just styled using a draft that I thought would just be incredibly difficult to properly approach. And they did it without any second thought or hesitation on the situation. Not only did this seem like a composition to troll in, but instead of just being wild and like chaotic with the fights, T1 continue to play their standard vision and neutral game approach. And the Buffaloes, for their part, did find many points to punish some of the missed positions. But at the end of the day, each player on T1 is just so much better, blow for blow, and outplay much of the engages that the Buffaloes try to gain on them. And like, how often do we need to see T1, who just fights with a player down and still trades up aggressively from it? The Buffaloes are still showing that some of their macro choices in vision play betray them, unfortunately. And hopefully they can improve before Friday comes in for the Rumble stage, because it's not looking great that their early game approaches are not holding up. And they might not get the chance to play that way against the other Rumble stage teams. Like, I don't think that's something they'll feasibly be able to do. So let's take a look at the goal graph here. Right? This gold graph is 11K before the 22-minute mark. They hold every neutral. Not a single one is lost. They hold virtually stopping every plate, only losing one plate up in the top side. And just because it's not clear on the situation, this is with a support Rumble that held Cleanse and Ghost. By all instances, this is like a situation people would just give up in. What the fuck are you doing? Why are you trying this? But like, this felt so bad to watch for the Buffaloes, who just kind of looked at the situation and were like, we're going to get our butts kicked by a draft that makes no sense in the long-term scale. But that's exactly what happened. So, let's take a look at the teams that we're saying goodbye to. Let's start with Detonation Focus Me. This team often excites me every year, right? This team is usually very well thought out, calculated, understands the basic concepts of how their team usually plays, and they've had a bit of a restructuring, losing 2 of their previous members and having to replace them on a very short notice for the 2022 season. And this is a team with players that stuck with them for years. And so a lot of the coordination is still there for this team, but they tend to choke in weird moments. Their playoff games don't usually reflect the way that they usually play in the regular season. And when they came into MSI, I was expecting them to do slightly better against the Buffaloes and even against Team Aze, but it didn't seem to pan out in that way, which is super unfortunate because Evie and Utapon are huge household names and are able to find some cool moments and some highlights to go with the to show an impression on everybody. But I'm sitting here going, they should have worked better on being able to balloon leads and to close out games. The largest 2 factors of this is that sure, you get the control of the early game, but if you're not able to consistently pull it out and to gain something from it and to choke out any other avenue to come back, it's hard to really be excited about that. But here's the thing. Detonation Focus Me also regularly improves super well going into Worlds. And so as they go into the summer season and going into their summer playoffs, it would not surprise me if they come to Worlds and start rocking it, just doing incredibly well. Because this is effectively a very new team, comparatively speaking. It's a new duo for mid. It's a new jungle mid duo, and so parts of their core, even with still 3 of their players being there, 2 of 3 different dynamics are completely new. And so the fact that they got here is fantastic. The fact that they still kept their dominance throughout their season in the region, also fantastic. But it's not super surprising that they could not adapt as well going into the international stage. But I would not be surprised if they, at the end of the year when Worlds comes around, they'll do great. I just hope that they don't choke in playoffs. The curse is still there for them. Let's take a look also at Team Aze. I really wanted to talk about them, mostly because out of most of the other teams, I thought that they would do second worst amongst everybody. I was really worried about the Red Cannons, but I was also equally worried about Team Aze. Both of these teams being ones that struggled just to get here. Now, Team Aze less so, came up from the upper bracket, hadn't lost a single one of their series, but that doesn't mean that their series were convincing in any way, shape, or form. They definitely had the upper hand in terms of a lot of aspects. Their vision play was better. They had an easier time understanding how to navigate the neutral objectives and how to find their win conditions. But seeing who were the qualifying teams for many of the other regions, their slow play nature was starting to become a red flag to me. And I would have really loved to see them have more opportunities to have equal footing on team fighting, because they have some fantastic coordination across the board on this team. They are very coordinated. They're just not up to snuff individually, player by player, to navigate a lot of this early game pressure that they've had to deal with. And I'm glad that we got to see that last game against the Detonation Focus Me, because they got wrecked by them on the first round robin. And in the second round robin, because the Detonation didn't find the angles of attack to properly close out and balloon the leads, Team Aze really got to show their chops on how they play their vision. The vision play specifically, I will credit, is what helped them win that game. The map is virtually dark for Detonation, who is just playing off of instinct alone at this point, whilst Team Aze has so much information regarding the situation. So it doesn't surprise me that they got a win off in that game. And then on top of it, because Detonation Focus Me is not a slouch in terms of team fighting. None of these teams are, right? The difference is who is the strongest early game team, who can actually get a lot more leads. And the fact that we got to see such solid team fighting out of them and are able to help hold up a lot of the skirmishes to gain these leads, great. I love it. It would have been just a shame to see a situation where in terms of order situation where they were unable to showcase what they were capable of, because these teams deserve showing what they were capable of doing. Just it's really hard with this particular meta and with this set of teams that happened. You're going to be dealt a shitty hand regardless of the group that you're going to be put in based on the pools. But that's what happens. Them's the ropes sometimes. But I do hope that we get to see them, or that at least that the information that they bring back to the region really helps elevate their early game play from there. Because Oh boy, that entire region needs a revamp on stuff. So, what are my final thoughts on the whole situation? Well, T1 is terrifying. Just absolutely terrifying. I don't see how anybody will think, like, if it's very rare for teams to go lossless across the tournament. I think it's never happened in a Riot sanctioned tournament where a team loses 0 games, and if they do, I think the last time it probably happened was in 2014 or 2014, the All Stars tournament, the precursor to the MSI, where SKT, that had previously won the 2013 World Championships, destroyed the entirety of like everyone that showed up in that tournament. I think it's the last time a Riot sanctioned tournament had to somebody that was like lossless. And I don't think T1 will, but they're definitely poised to not lose a single game. And it's very hard for me to really like G2 and the Royals are possibly are the only teams that I think can contest at this current point. Like I said, the Buffaloes had a chance to, but they're showing it at this current moment they have no idea how to navigate this kind of pacing, as it's much more intense than what they had to deal with against the Marines. Or like, honestly, G2 and the Royals are playing at a pace of the game that's like just slightly slower and with a bit less coordination. Like it's so hard to tell these things because like all 3 of those teams wrecked. They were lossless across the board in their groups, and their largest competitor barely made a dent in them, if at all. The difference here is that there was no closest competitor for T1. And I can see a world where the Buffaloes beat either Royal Never Give Up or G2. There's there's no world in which I see Evil Geniuses or the Talons beating T1. But I could see the Evil Geniuses beating Royal Never Give Up, and I can see the Talons beating G2. Like the tier right below is not so far removed from G2 and Royals, but there's no chance. At least those are my thoughts. That's how I'm interpreting the group stages. It's been my thought that they were going to win MSI literally from the second they qualified. They were so terrifying, and it's nothing so far this tournament has shown me changes my mind on that fact. Another thought in terms of things that are happening across the 36 games that have played, Ari and Lucian stay 100% pick ban presence. Ari is losing a lot of her win rate, but I think that's because teams that are picking her up aren't utilizing her as well as they could, or it's because they're playing against T1 or the Worlds or G2. So that's understandable. The win rate is not going to be high in that situation, but things that are moving up in priority that I'm really enjoying seeing is the flexibility of LeBlanc and Gwen, especially since LeBlanc seems to be filling in a very similar status as Ari and is used as an answer to, not necessarily counter, but a good answer to. And Gwen, who has been showing to be a lot better at team fighting more and more, and its core kit is not geared to that specifically, right? It's geared for 1v1s or 2v1s, so on and so forth. I really would just I want to see if there's anything that could counter it that's not just a Gangplank maybe, or Jax maybe. Is there an answer to this that really nullifies her effect out of playing around the map? Because she has such a high priority, and at this moment, I don't know anything that would have that kind of effect to it. And so I'm wondering, does this particular champion start getting more bans in the priorities? We have yet to see. The Rumble stages, I do expect the meta to change quite a bit from the Rumble stage, as a lot of these teams are already early game powerhouses, And so there's going to be a lot of adjustments in terms of like scaling to the situation. But I don't know if like I still think the Lucian, the Wukong, the Gwen, as well as like Ari and LeBlanc are still going to be in the mixture there. I'm just wondering if they're going to be adding in anything else that could scale better or answer it in that particular manner. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I could be wrong regarding the situation, but like that's the trend that I'm noticing, and from what I can see in terms of like the game stats, I want to let. What are your thoughts below? Do you think there's a different team that is a bigger favorites than T1 at this current moment, or do you think like it might be a little bit closer between like any other given team? Otherwise, who do you think are going to be the top 4 going through? I'd love to hear those thoughts. I'm pretty set on literally like there's the 3 obvious ones, but the 4th place is not super obvious to me. I'm leaning a little bit into the Buffaloes, but I could see more evil geniuses making through. I have no faith in the Talons currently until they fix something. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. And thank you all those who have watched. And if you're new here and like this content, leave a like and subscribe with it. There may be a video coming in between now and Friday when the Rumble stages start. But if there isn't, I will see you all Friday for the Rumble stages. See you then.